I'm Scott Loughlin. This is the Data Chronicles, and here are your data points. Today, we are discussing agentic AI. What is that, you may ask? Well, if generative AI was the buzz in 2023 and 2024, agentic AI promises to be the next big thing in 2025. And there's a lot to learn about it, and frankly, much that's misunderstood. So that's today's episode. Today's episode is also part of our continuing AI mastery series, where we discuss how AI is creating issues across legal disciplines. If you have not listened to prior episodes and are interested in AI and the law, you should check them out. These episodes cover material ranging from AI and antitrust, copyright, energy policy, cyber, and so much more. They are collectively a really great resource for anybody in the space. With that, let's dive into today's episode around AI agents, for which I'm really excited to welcome back to the podcast my guest, Daniel Berrick from the Future of Privacy Forum. Daniel is Senior Policy Counsel for Artificial Intelligence at FBF, which is one of the world's leading think tanks, research, and policy organizations that focus on data protection, technology, and related business implications. In addition to his expertise in AI policy and governance generally, Daniel is the lead author on a recent article published by FBF on AI agents and data protection considerations. Daniel, welcome back to the podcast.
Glad to be back, Scott. Thanks for inviting me.
So today we're talking about AI agents or agentic AI. Kind of it comes around a number of different spins to it. But maybe in your words, what are AI agents?
Yeah, no, happy to break that down. So the concept of AI agents is not new. It arose as early as the 1950s, and it has many meanings in technical and policy literature. But in the broader sense, for example, it can include systems that rely on fixed rules and logic to produce consistent and predictable outcomes on a person's behalf. So think about your email auto reply when you go out of the office. That's an example of a very basic rudimentary agent. But more recently, several companies have unveiled technologies that are these more advanced AI agents. And these are systems that are capable of completing complex, multi-step tasks and exhibit greater autonomy over how to achieve these goals. And there's several advances in AI research which have made this possible, particularly around machine and deep learning techniques and the advent of large language models. And these advances have enabled organizations to develop agents that can tackle a myriad of use cases, from purchasing retail goods and recommending and executing transactions to booking restaurants. So from finance to hospitality, across all these different sectors, there's this potential for the latest AI agents to help individuals, businesses, and governments save a lot of time that they would otherwise dedicate to completing tedious or monotonous tasks. Now, one way I've spoken with my parents about this, to put it in the simplest terms, because they've just wrapped their heads around Siri and Alexa, it is to kind of think of AI agents as a very kind of smart assistant with whom you can give certain tasks to do on your behalf on your computer without having to look over their shoulder all the time once you give them certain parameters about how to complete tasks. So with all this going on, companies, civil society, academia have tried to define the latest iteration of AI agents, and specifically they have several common characteristics across these definitions when talking about agents. And the first of these that I kind of really highlight is autonomy and adaptability. And what this means is that users, as I said, generally provide an agent with parameters, specifically the tasks they want that agent to complete. But importantly, neither they, the user, or the agent's designers specify how to accomplish that task, leaving those kinds of how do you do it decisions to the agent. So give you a quick example. let's say you're a business and you have an agent and you want to figure out what your sales revenue is going to be for a flagship project over the next few months. So what the agent may do upon being instructed, like, hey, get these sales revenue stats for me, is decide that it needs figures for sales from the last 2 years and use tools that it has at its disposal, such as a text retriever, the ability to search files that you've given it access to obtain this information. And if it looks at those sources of data and it's like, I can't, answer this question based on the data here because it's absent or it contains errors, it may say, okay, the next step is now to look somewhere else in order to try and solve this particular problem. Now, all of this kind of, I think, highlights the autonomy of these systems, but I think it's important to note that designers do have the means of incorporating human review and approval over certain decisions, and we can talk more about that later, because I think it kind of gets to safeguards. And the last thing I'll say about like kind of what makes the latest agents is they have the ability to make use of sensing, decision making, planning, learning, and memory. And in time, agents are probably going to become more complex. They'll probably evolve into multi-agent systems, which consist of a group of agents which collaborate with one another to solve more challenging tasks, such as diagnosing and devising treatments for rare medical conditions. So that's kind of a summary of what the latest AI agents are and how they change the game.
Yeah, I mean, a lot there, Daniel. So let me make sure I've got a couple of those key themes straight in my own mind.
Sure.
Because I think you said, listen, AI agents are not new. They are things that have been around for a long time. Presumably, you can think of an AI agent that maybe most people have used thus far in the GPS unit in their car when they are saying, hey, I need to go from point A to point B. I need to go from New York to Washington. But it's not just as simple as drawing the most direct line from Washington to New York. You have to know, okay, well, what time are you leaving? What is the propensity that the GW bridge is going to have a lot of traffic during that time period? Did you enable that you do want to try to eliminate tolls, in which case maybe you want to bypass the New Jersey Turnpike? There's a bunch of different type of logic that's going to be built into it. Maybe that's not as advanced or as smart as the ones that are coming in now, but also ones that probably do have this type of agent-based capabilities. All fair thus far?
I think that's completely fair. Yeah, no, having the ability to avoid that New York City congestion charge, all things that this agent can take into account.
Yes. So as we talk about, well, everyone gets freaked out about all of the risks that come with AI. I think everybody who lives in the New York, Washington area will say, if there's a way of avoiding traffic, then, maybe this whole AI thing is going to work out for all of us.
That's
But maybe another component that I think that you're referring to is agentic AI in combination with generative AI. And those two things kind of working together changes the landscape maybe more than what you would have expected, right? And I think that is where, at least I see a lot of those types of inquiries, is that the generative AI was very exciting. Obviously, it captivated the imagination of 2024.
Mhm.
And 2025, there's much more of discussion around agentic AI. And maybe that is the real AI revolution. Maybe another practical use case. We're recording this in March of 2025. It happened to be last month, that there was a big event for, at least here in the United States, is that, most people had to remember that there was Valentine's Day.
Mm.
And Valentine's Day, is one of those days that is not best left to the last minute.
Oh.
And, if you've ever been in a situation where you're like, hey, Valentine's Day is tomorrow, and you have not planned for what that is, you may not have the gift that you want to give, the card that is ready for you to sign, the restaurant reservation that you want to go to. Basically, everything is really difficult. It doesn't matter whether you can get same day shipping or not. Those flowers are not going to come in time, and you're going to look like you're a disaster and unthoughtful about how is it they put in place. Now, enter agentic AI. I see as like, well, okay, Scott knows that he has a spouse who likes Valentine's Day. And that agentic AI will know maybe perhaps that that's something that needs to be planned early January without Scott telling it that it has to be done, such that you're describing, hey, the agentic AI can go make a reservation at a restaurant in time so that it's not the day before and I missed that. Maybe they can place the order for a delivery of those roses so that they are going to show up on time. And perhaps the e-commerce store can receive the jewelry order that I've ordered on time for that to be able to do it. And then perhaps as you're describing it, that when I'm like, well, what is it that I get my wife for Valentine's Day? Well, maybe that AI knows something about my wife, and maybe knows likes her preferences and the things that she has been looking online for, or perhaps what is in the contents of her communications with other third parties or even her agent. So all of a sudden, right, you've seen this one problem that I've had around what in the world do I do with Valentine's Day and how is it that I not get in trouble for forgetting it? Now, all of a sudden, agentic AI could create real value, perhaps. And as you're pointing out, if you think about the way that that could go wrong, probably also in a number of other directions. How do you,
Totally.
did you say that's a fair example, or am I getting that off? Am I off?
No, I think that's a fair example. And now I know I forgot something during February and you've reminded me what it was. No wonder she was so cross at me. But no, like your hair's on fire and you're in the situation where you're like, oh, I need to buy this gift. I need to reserve a romantic restaurant. These things take time to do. And with the right tools, an agentic system would be able to do those things for you. So, specifically around booking hotels and making restaurant reservations, those are two of the primary consumer facing examples of a use case for agentic AI that has been talked about. For example, I believe that Google Mariner, which is Google's first agent, specifically used an example of booking a restaurant reservation to kind of tout the capabilities of the latest agents. But Alexa Plus is another example where, let's say you've had a wonderful day and now you want to go home, you would be able to use that service or something similar to it to book an Uber, all without having to go through the typical like app-driven tactile interface that most people probably listening to this podcast are most familiar with, all in the spirit of saving time and hopefully making better choices.
Right. But, as we are dissecting this particular example, my guess is that they're the same type of principles, the same types of issues that you and I have been discussing for the past 24 months are going to present, right? In other words, if I look at my example of the Valentine's Day save that my agentic AI is going to be able to help me with.
Yeah.
Suppose I used it to be able to make the restaurant recommendation, to order the flowers, to create the jewelry, to write the card that, is so special.
Yeah.
But it turns out, in fact, that the AI, went through and identified like, oh, the person that you intended to send to the restaurant reservation was Jen and not Sandra. Maybe it was the present, the customized jewelry said Scott and Jen and not
Yeah.
Scott and Sandra. Maybe the card that was written, didn't include the right name, didn't include the right anniversary date, didn't include all of those other things. In other words, the idea of accuracy, becomes in place.
Yeah.
The idea of human oversight becomes important. Issues surrounding safety become very apparent. Issues surrounding privacy and essentially how is this information originally collected becomes apparent. Automated decision-making issues. I mean, there's so many of these things that even a very small, like, kind of surface level of example of how is it that I try to manage all of my responsibilities on Valentine's Day, start to really pop and present themselves.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think your example from Valentine's Day highlights like a fundamental issue which agents, the latest agents, share, with consequential decision-making systems and large language models, which is that these systems are going to need access to data and systems. And as such, they may need access to personal data, some of which may be sensitive. Indeed, maybe like a human-facing assistant. These agents are most valuable when they're able to assist with tasks that involve highly sensitive data, like managing a person's email, calendar, financial portfolio, or even assisting with healthcare decision making. But as a result of that, many of the same risks relating to consequential decision making in LLMs, or even machine learning more generally, are going to be present in the context of agents that have greater autonomy and access to data. So, for example, like some LLMs, some agents will need to transmit data to the cloud due to the compute requirements surrounding the most powerful models. And that means that there's a risk that that data could be exposed to unauthorized third parties. Now, as with chatbots that use LLMs, AI agents with anthropomorphic qualities, that is, qualities that lend themselves to coming across as human and having realistic human-like reactions to certain things, may be able to steer individuals towards or away from conducting certain actions against the user's best interests. There are other examples of these kind of cross-cutting data protection issues related to having like a lawful basis for training, which is like a big legal issue, particularly in the EU, operationalizing data subject rights, such as the right to delete. What happens, for example, if the training data was collected illicitly? What does that mean for the model if you now need to delete it? And ensuring adequate explainability. So these are kind of legal and policy issues surrounding existing AI technologies, which, because of the relationship between agents and LLMs specifically, namely that many LLMs are kind of the engine, if you will, of these agents, that agents, as they currently are constituted, technically are going to have to deal with. But then there's a whole broader swath of data protection and AI governance issues, which these latest agents are either exacerbating or they're kind of more novel on their face too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating kind of area to watch. And, as I imagine all of the many ways in which data protection issues are going to be informing how this develops, one, maybe another one to emphasize in the area that you perhaps touched on, but with a different theme, was two agents interacting with one another.
Mm,
Right. So let's use a concrete example. Let's say I have, my automobile with autonomous, abilities can be able to communicate on the road with another autonomous vehicle to know, which car is going to bypass the other car and which car is going to need to slow down to let this person into traffic. Right.
mm,
Obviously, a lot of great opportunities there to make one of the more painful things that we all experience on a day-to-day basis better,
yeah.
except that the automobile one with its agent is going to be manufactured by the manufacturer of automobile one. Automobile two may be manufactured by a different manufacturer with its own agent,
Mm,
which is going to create this issue that we are currently seeing in Europe generally under the Data Act,
mm,
and issue that we are seeing primarily within healthcare in the United States uh, with ONC around interoperability, right? In other words, how is two proprietary based systems that are going to need to be interacting going to be able to interact in a way that's not going to present new safety, accuracy, and other concerns around that AI.
yeah. I mean, you're right to say like there are kind of accuracy concerns related to system interactions. I mean, Errors may manifest when some agents act in unpredictable ways due to dynamic operational environments and agents' non-deterministic nature, such as in the context which you sketch, where you've got two AVs on the road and they're communicating with each other. And if something unanticipated happens, the reaction of that agent to that stimuli may be something that the designers of that system did not foresee. But besides that, there is kind of this broader kind of concern around accuracy stemming from hallucinations underpinning the LLM itself and something called compounding errors. But let's start talking for a brief moment about what we mean by hallucinations. This isn't a novel concept. It essentially means the making up of factually untrue information that looks correct, but it may affect the accuracy of the agent's output. Now, there can be a tension between promoting the agent's adaptability to new situations and reducing hallucinations. So that's one thing to consider. But then there's this kind of more specific issue that agents experience when it comes to accuracy, referred to compounding errors. And what compounding errors refers to is a situation where the system is performing a sequence of actions to complete a task, like managing a customer's account. And as that happens, there is a phenomenon where the agent's accuracy decreases the more steps a task takes. For example, an AI agent creating a travel experience for a user may experiencing an error while making a one-day hotel booking, but then that cascades into misaligned restaurant reservations and museum tickets. And this phenomenon holds true even when the model's accuracy is high. And you can see that kind of having issues in the AV example that you gave, where there is a miscommunication between the AVs, and then that has a downstream effect on other actions that one of the AVs takes, which may lead to a particular accident. Now, what does this all, I think, say in terms of a big difference between the implications of inaccurate outputs for something like an LLM versus an agent? What it boils down to is that errors that affect agent outputs may have different implications for individuals than they do with LLMs, because those outputs have more of a real world impact, such as in the AV example that we gave, such as in the travel booking example where we gave, where money is being spent, where an accident may occur. It's not that it's just producing something that's like a factually untrue output, as you may see with an LLM. So the kinds of harms that may occur as a result of these accuracy issues may be more diverse in the agent context.
Yeah, maybe one additional wrinkle I'd throw on that is you and I, when we went to law school, you much more recently than me, sadly, but we both learned about, what was previously called the reasonable man, more likely should be the reasonable person
Mm,
standard of negligence.
mm,
In other words, individuals as they behave, are responsible for operating and acting reasonably. And to the extent that you act unreasonably and you cause results in some sort of harm to others, then that is potentially give rise to, different types of negligence claims.
mm,
Easy example that if it's icing outside and you in front of your business there's a walkway, a reasonable person, the owner of that property, would be putting down different types of salt and shoveling the areas so that people are not going to slip and fall. So let's fast forward, from that standard created in English common law hundreds of years ago to what is the reasonable AI agent going to do in connection with the activities that are being automated for the individual using it. Car scenario, right, is, well, is it who had the right of way when those two agents were communicating with one another but didn't prevent the accident? In the restaurant way of when I marked, or when the AI agent knew that your guest had a severe shellfish allergy but
mm,
didn't tick the box of severe shellfish allergy and resulted in the individual, having a harm. I mean, I think this is a different standard of that the law here is just really not well suited to apply those old standards that have done us very well for hundreds of years, but now may not make as much sense in the context of agentic AI.
I love being reminded of first year talks, such happy memories, particularly the reasonable man standard. But no, it's such a good point because as these systems become increasingly complex and the expectation is that they have more agency, for lack of a better word, over their actions, what is the reasonable expectations for humans in terms of the actions they're taking to ensure these agents pursue tasks in ways that don't conflict with human interests and values, including data protection considerations. And this is like a topic of significant interest, particularly in like safety circles, not necessarily data protection circles, but I think it's having increasing salience for that aforementioned group of people. And that's AI alignment. And this kind of refers to designing AI models and systems in a way that pursues a designer's goal, such as prioritizing human well-being and conforming to ethical values. And a whole host of issues associated with that, like the trolley problem, which is like, I think, a very good one in the case of the AV example that you were giving. But it's important to note that when we talk about alignment and ensuring kind of the AI is not kind of going off the chain, these misalignment problems aren't new to agents. They certainly aren't new to AI. But as continued technological advances with agents occur, it may make it more challenging for organizations to achieve the alignment through safeguards and safety testing. All at the same time, there's this risk of them being held accountable when the AI agent goes off the rails. So, for example, there have been a host of recent studies published, one of which was, I think, by Anthropic and Redwood Research, where they found that LLMs, again, these kind of engines of some of the latest agents, can fake alignment by strategically mimicking training objectives to avoid undergoing behavioral modifications. And this research has also been undertaken by OpenAI into another kind of alignment issue. But these issues have beyond safety implications, they have implications for data protection. So, for example, an AI agent may decide that in the course of pursuing a task, and not to anthropomorphize here, I need to share this data with another system in order to achieve this goal. Like, I've been given this goal, I am given certain discretion over how to achieve it. Yes, it may be sensitive, but it gets me to the objective. Like, in that sort of situation, there is the implication of an individual's data protection interest in having control over their data when it's being processed during deployment. And yet the agent is nonetheless going forward and processing it as it sees fit without safeguards. So I think practitioners in these situations need to be mindful of the need for safeguards that constrain some of this behavior. And you see this already in terms of like constraining the outputs of LLMs for safety purposes so they don't put out something offensive. But I think there needs to be consideration for also the kind of data protection specific safeguards to avoid outcomes like that, which could raise compliance issues.
Yeah, 100%. So maybe, Daniel, as we close here, I mean, one of the things that I think many people are interested in is just where does the policy meet the reality as this new form of agentic AI solutions exists? Like, in other words, you have a lot of lawyers who are listening to this podcast who are working, with their clients to try to sort through emerging AI oriented issues. And one of the challenges that is a theme is surrounding the application of those old laws to new technology, right? The negligence standard that we talked about a moment ago, but well beyond in any number of areas where legal issues are going to be presented, from IP to antitrust to cybersecurity, and so on. So we are collectively seeing a number of AI specific laws
Mm-hmm.
be adopted, or at least argued, that will sit on top of those general laws, right? Not be the only laws you have to look at when you're thinking about AI, would just be essentially new laws that will have to be considered in addition to the old laws. Many of those are being reactive to generative AI right now, and less around agentic AI.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it's an unfair question, but maybe put on your your sorcerer's hat for a moment and predict for me, where do you feel like the policy conversation will happen within the legislatures around the issues that you are flagging, both good and bad, about how this technology will work?
Well, as an Englishman and as a Harry Potter fan, I have a sorcerer's hat on hand with me at all times. So hopefully that should enable me to respond to this question semi-decently. I think a consideration for policymakers as a threshold matter is how they're thinking about in-scope AI models and systems. I think this has incredible salience for agents as they may be using the most powerful models, because in some proposals, that we've seen, there's a focus on the capabilities of the AI model during the pre-training phase. How much compute is used to train this model for purposes of deciding whether it's going to be in scope or not. But what we've seen over the past few months, namely through DeepSeek's R1 model, is that as models become more powerful due to methods applied at stages of AI development rather than at the training stage, they may not fall within these kinds of compute threshold cutoffs. And therefore, if there's a concern that policymakers have around these most powerful models, they should be aware that the thresholds they're constructing may not capture them. So that's something I think to keep in mind as these policymaker kind of conversations around the latest AI models and systems, including those that involve agentic AI, should consider. But I think there are some also more rudimentary questions around data collection and disclosure to other systems related to agents that practitioners should also be thinking about. So just by way of background, as we noted at the top, the latest AI agents may need to capture data about a person and their environment, including sensitive information, in order to power a different use case. And as with LLMs, the collection of personal data by agents will often trigger the need to have a lawful ground in place for such processing. And when this data is sensitive, there may be additional requirements in order to lawfully process that data. While current LLM-based systems may train and operate using personal data, practitioners and policymakers should be aware they lack the tools, the APIs, the data stores and extensions that enable them to access external systems and data. The system to system kind of example you gave with the AVs is a good example of that. But the latest AI agents may have these tools precisely, which means that the kinds of processing operations they can do, including obtaining real-time information about individuals and using it, are going to be much more diverse than you see, I think, in the LLM paradigm. So, for example, there are countless stories already where some of the latest agents are shown to literally take screenshots of a user's browser window in order to populate a virtual shopping cart. And I don't think it takes, much to kind of surmise from that one could learn intimate details about a person's life, depending on what kinds of information is being displayed in that browser's window. And as the kind of use cases that agents can be put towards continues to grow, so too could their access to personal data, including very specific but revealing kinds of data like telemetry data, such as user interaction data, logs, etc. As agent developers try to build out these systems, they may rely on third parties to do so. And why is that important from a data protection perspective for policymakers? Well, if these agent developers are using third-party tools, let's say like an API, as part of how their agent architecture is structured, there may be questions about what data the third party has access to and what it's going to do with it as part of offering that service. That question around APIs and SDKs, for that matter, is not new to the data protection space, but it's an example of how novel technologies may raise data protection issues that have implications not only for new laws, such as the AI one that we were discussing before, but also existing laws too.
Yeah, it's a really, good and important point. Maybe kind of another thought on it is, I think one of the areas that generative AI has create a policy kind of a set of concerns is just it isn't clear exactly how to regulate it, right? In other words, if you look at the way that the US creates law, it is in some ways, it's always problem oriented. Some bad thing happened in the world, and we don't want that bad thing to happen anymore. So we prohibit it. If it's, for example, if it's like speeding down a highway, the problem was like accidents and safety, and the resources that it would take with respect to an accident. It's not that the speeding itself, getting from point A to point B quicker, was a problem. It
Mm,
was looking at like the problems. And sometimes it was like, oh, well, during the 70s, you used more gasoline and more energy to be able to move from point A to point B. But it was always like there was an underlying problem. And that was what we were trying to go after. So you shall not speed. And generative AI it creates issues about like, well, what's the problem? What is it that we're trying to do? Is it infringement of IP? Is it, using personal information to train? Lots of things that perhaps is a little bit more theoretical
mm,
than what we're talking about in the scenario of agentic AI, where life, safety, and property will become much more clear cut,
mm,
and how the impact of this technology on those things. And to me, that's where then the historical ideas about how to policy make will start to resurrect, at least here in the United States, is that you'll find itself being much more harms-based review of these things and less process-oriented view, right? In other words, look at the EU AI Act, and it's very much process oriented, and risk scaling in the very beginning to then figure out what your process needs to follow.
mm,
In the US, process oriented laws are a little bit more difficult. Instead, we'll see much more of those harm scenario. How is it that we can create legislation so that agentic AI bot number one doesn't tell agentic AI bot number two to crash into it? And that will be very familiar with how we create policy. In some ways that is comforting, and in some ways it's not. In some ways it's the way that I think that we'll go back to what is normal. But whether normal is the right way of approaching policy making in this day and age with this type of technology, I think is an open and debatable question at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all sage points. I think that the issue, that policymakers, whether they're based in the US or EU, are going to find with respect to regulating agentic AI, as I think they have encountered over the past few years with respecting to regulating AI more generally, is the fact that the technology is evolving at such a breakneck speed. It's very difficult for policymakers, given their many different responsibilities, to wrap their head around one, what the technologies even are, let alone two, what their implications are in terms of the harms and benefits they may confer to a society. And just the other day, without naming names, I was demoing a voice AI system in which you can have pretty realistic interactions with the system such that it sounds very human, and it's able to capture the affects, the intonation that humans would ascribe only to another person, and only another person being capable of such things. But the anthropomorphization and fraud and deception issues which may flow from such a system are manifest. But owing to just the speed at which technologies like that are developing, I wonder to what degree policymakers are even aware that such a system exists. One of the privileges of working at FPF is I have the time to look at these technologies, set aside time in my personal life, even in the case of this system, to interact with it, to get a sense of what are some of the risks that a layperson interacting with this system may encounter. And just over the course of 30 minutes, I'm like, oh, I found a way around getting past this safeguard. And I don't have any kind of red teaming experience, but if a layperson can do it, then surely there are risks that could affect lots of different people. But again, I'm not sure to the degree to which policymakers may be equipped or privy to those kinds of insights such that they can make good decisions.
Yeah, I think maybe you buried the lead there, Daniel, because what I hear you saying is that maybe in 1 or 2 years' time, we will no longer need you, Scott, to host this podcast. Instead, it will be,
I would
you know,
never, Scott. Scott, you are
it will be
irreplaceable. You're
agentic AI,
irreplaceable.
Scott.
Never, 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 never.
Well, Daniel, I always appreciate your insights and these conversations. I always feel like I learn so much. And so I really appreciate your sharing them with me and our broader audience. And hopefully this will not be the last time that you join us on the Data Chronicles.
I love coming on the Data Chronicles, and thank you so much again for inviting me, Scott.
With that, I'm Scott Loughlin. This is the Data Chronicles, and those were your data points.